So we kind of came to the end of Mark, and we did 4 great weeks on what it means to lead people through this idea of suffering. And the author of Mark worked really hard to weave in details that would make sure that the first listener to this text would have understood that he was trying to relate what he was going through at the current time to what Christ had gone through 30 or 40 or even 50 years prior, depending on how you understand some of the dating. And, the introduction of who Jesus was all the way through each of his miraculous deeds, but watching people suffer along with him, and whether it's in the boat or it's on the water. And then ultimately this week, we really focused on Peter and Peter's suffering and how the betrayer, according to Mark, is Judas. And yet, to the first century reader, the betrayer would have been Peter. Peter would have been shamed and scandaled out of the tribe. To turn to your rabbi and to say you knew nothing of him, to publicly denounce this person that you'd given your entire life to, it's kind of like disowning your father. And in that moment, as Peter realizes that he's thrown away 3 years of his life, the shame, the guilt, the suffering on Peter would have been made known. And that's another thing that Mark is saying, like the writer of Mark is saying, like, even if you make your own suffering, even if you are the one to cause the suffering on yourself, it's not because it happened to you, but because you did it, that Jesus is still there to offer a second chance. The angel understands Jesus' wishes. When the women come to the tomb and the angel's like, hey, listen, go get the disciples and Peter, tell them to meet us in Galilee. That was the plan. And I think it's really beautiful that the author has included that detail, because it gives us great hope, because many of us make mistakes in our life. Nobody is perfect. And oftentimes those mistakes lead to us suffering in some capacity. Whether it's mental, emotional, physical, maybe our actions have caused someone else to suffer. And the fact that Jesus gives second chances and that he'll walk with you and sit next to you in the suffering doesn't necessarily mean that it'll all get removed, but at some point it ends. And when that ends, there's this moment that you are able to look back at your suffering and to say, wow, I got through that. Wow, goodness and mercy really did follow me all the way through that. I didn't see it at the moment. The lamp to my feet did not show me the goodness and mercy that was hounding me. And yet we have this beautiful walking out of the suffering and sitting with Jesus. So as you read Mark, or as you read another book of the Bible, as you go through Matthew and Luke and John and start to dabble into Acts, or even if you go into the Old Testament, there are tons of resources out there. Find something that fits your style. If you need suggestions, hit up any of our staff. We would love to help you find resources so that you can build on this idea of reading Scripture from a contextual standpoint, where what did the disciples hear? How would have the first reader heard this? And to start to put together all the beautiful nuance of what the writers are trying to convey on who Jesus is, how his unchanging nature is still sitting next to you today.